the entirety of the original bill, leaving the current guardian structure in place, and creates a subset of family member guardians who may also work as independent providers and who may be subject to increased oversight by the Office of Public Guardian. Sorry. There's one thing we need to change yet, though. The Office of Public Guardian does not currently oversee private guardianships, and since the point of the bill is to give a limited number of family members who are guardians status as a provider, the oversight should come from the Department of Health and Human Services. I believe we need to find a way to increase the provider workforce. This bill and amendment is just the start of how we can deal with our disparity in access to care. I would like to just note that this has been a very spirited conversation in the community of developmental disabilities. And as you can see, and we're going to hear both support and opposition to this bill. And I want to assure the committee that I am working with everyone involved, and unless I have an amendment that resolves that, I probably will be bringing a resolution to continue this work over the interim. But I am excited to hear from everyone and for you to hear from them as well. I'll take any questions.
Senator Kavanaugh, is this about having family members who serve as guardians being compensated through the Medicaid process?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Currently, that doesn't happen. They have to have do they have to have an outside provider?
Yes.
And we no longer let family members do it?
So family members aren't compensated. Whether they do it.
Has that always been true, or was there a time when they were compensated and we no longer do?
That is an excellent question. I don't know the answer to, but I have a
Somebody
I have a
will know
feeling
the answer
this
to
next
that.
bracket does.
I thought when I was doing the work with the Special Investigative Committee that family members could be compensated, but we changed that rule. But that's your goal, though.
That is my goal, is to
Okay,
allow
there's
them.
people shaking their heads in both directions. So at least I've started.
You have, and I think we have unearthed that I am not the expert, but hopefully a few people behind me will be.
Okay, very good. Well, we appreciate you bringing the bill to us, and we'll look forward to the testimony.
Okay, thank
We'll
you.
begin with proponent testimony at this time. And by the way, how many people are going to testify so we can let Senator Day know? 1, 2, keep up, 3, 4, 5. You got to move, Edison. 6, 7, 8, 14. Okay, very good. Welcome.
Hello, my name is Edison McDonald, EDISON MCDONALD, representing the ARC of Nebraska. We're the state's largest membership organization representing people with intellectual and developmental disabilities and their families. We're here representing those individuals and families who struggle to get care, lack proper supports, and are unable to find services. We strongly support LB 1216 as amended by AM 1949 to allow for family member guardians and power of attorneys to be independent providers. Per Senator Lathrop's question, currently the status is that some family members can be on the A&D waiver, that is allowed. On the DD waiver, that's problematic. Then we also have to deal with that you can have one person where you have one guardian. So like say the husband would be the guardian and then the mother would be the independent provider. And then also if you don't have guardianship at all, then a family member can still be a provider. So over the last 4 years, I've heard this issue come up a number of times, but this year in particular, due to COVID and the considerable increase in the number of individuals and families who want this, as evidenced by the folks who are testifying today in the letter, towards it, we need to work on modifying our system. Most other states already allow this to happen. Nebraska is a rare exception in this regard. In particular, this is really effective towards folks in rural communities. As you can see on the map on page 2, it shows where provider agencies are. And typically independent providers are going to serve family members, are going to serve people in rural communities. They're going to serve minor children, and they're going to serve people in more unique circumstances, as I think you'll hear today. I think I really want to focus in on the technical details. We have to make this change according to DHHS Provider Bulletin 19-02 that limits the type of family member guardians that can be independent providers. Next, I want to address a few concerns that you're going to hear. First, you're going to hear that this would go and allow institutions to end up being a guardian or agencies. That was never the intention. That language is overly broad. The second is that this will increase guardianships. It won't. It'll allow people who are already guardians or POAs to become providers. Third, you're going to hear how this takes away protections from individuals, and that is something we want to avoid and mitigate whenever possible. But we have a number of protections, including that we do have electronic visit verification. We have service coordinators from the state that are a first line of defense. And DHHS has told us that they plan to get a fiscal intermediary. And I've hit my light already.
Okay. Well, I don't see any questions at this time, but thanks for being here. Your support of the bill. Next proponent. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Senator Lathrop. My name is Kim Bainbridge, KIMBAINBRIDGE, and I'm testifying as a proponent of LB 1216 with amendments. I'm Justin's mom. Justin is 32. He has Down syndrome. I'm also a single parent. Justin received his day waiver in July of 2010. After being on the waiting list for additional services, after 7 years, he got the comprehensive waiver. In the 12 years that my son has had a waiver that paid for his services, I have almost never had any help on nights or on weekends. And I have used both the mixture of service providers and independent providers. During COVID, my son has regressed. He's lived in his own apartment for 8 years. He will no longer stay in his apartment on weekends when he does not have any staff. So guess what? The only provider is me. I currently use both a service provider and an independent provider. There are no backups. I am the only backup if either one of my staff cannot help. Parents simply cannot get or find service providers. There is maybe some concern that a parent might abuse the system. Well, let's talk about this. Let's talk about how difficult it is to be an independent provider. Attached to my testimony is a 4-page document from DHHS on how to become an independent provider. There are 11 links on that document. Those links lead to 228 document pages and another 53 links or drop-down boxes. Who knows if you have to read them all? Now, to become an independent provider, you need a referral. It comes back to you, then you need a Medicaid referral. Then it comes back to you. Then it has to go to Maximus. You have to take first aid and CPR training all on your own time and at your own expense. If you get approved, a service coordinator gives you a service authorization. Now, as a parent, you have to write a program. You have to have measurable outcomes, and you have to meet twice a year. Let's talk about electronic visit verification that Edison talked about. On that resource page on the DHHS website, there are 10 drop-down boxes and 103 additional links to become paid. You know, as parents, we are overwhelmed with paperwork. We have Nebraska Medicaid renewal every year, Social Security renewal every 1 to 7 years, representative payee report every year, and the granddaddy of them all, guardianship paperwork, which in my case has varied from 30 to 120 pages. All of this because the court system and DHHS allowed Judith Widener of Gering, Nebraska in 2013 to be the guardian of 216 individuals who she embezzled money from. Will someone abuse the system if it's passed? Maybe. But do you punish 99 parents who do all the work to become an independent provider for their child because one person messes up, and that one person might not even be a parent? As parents, we cannot find staff through service or independent providers allow us to be paid. Thank you.
Senator Brand.
Thank you, Chairman Lathrop. Thank you, Ms. Bainbridge, for your testimony. The required paperwork that you're referring to, is that a state problem or is that the federal requires all those questions and all that paperwork? Do you know?
It's actually both.
Okay, so I mean, if we got the state, if you took the state out of this, would it be any better for you?
For me, it would, yes. My son has Down syndrome. That's a chromosome disorder. This is never going away. The fact that I am constantly preparing reports showing that he still needs help. He's going to need help every day the rest of his life. I have to apply for Nebraska Medicaid every year. I have to prove to Social Security every 7 years that chromosome hasn't went away. The guardianship paperwork is just out of control.
All right, thank you.
Yes.
Boy, what I've seen since I started practicing law to get a guardianship and the hoops you gotta jump through. Every time somebody defrauds somebody, we get another wave of regulations and another wave of bills. Yeah, I get it.
But Senator Lathrop, it wasn't a parent who did the embezzlement. It was the court system and DHHS that allowed one woman to have,
Oh, I remember that.
you remember that, she was from Gary.
Yeah.
She was the one embezzling. It's not a parent, but we're always the ones punished, Senator Lathrop.
Right. Well, I appreciate your testimony,
Thank you.
having you here today. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. My name's Lisa Baxa, Lisa Baxa. I'm a parent of a nonverbal adult son with autism. He lives with me and my husband in Rural Clay Center, which is 25 miles southeast of Hastings. My husband and I have worked hard all of our son's life to provide him with support he needs to live a full and active life, while still providing him as much independence as possible. Until recently, my husband and I had powers of attorney rights to our son's affairs. However, due to recent DHHS policy, my husband and I were forced to change this. In doing so, my son has less of support than he needs to be successful, integrated part of his community. Living in Rural Clay Center for over 20 years, we wanted our son to be in a safe environment where he can experience work and volunteer opportunities as an adult and interact with people in his community. In 2011, Community Supports Program with independent providers was the better fit. Independent providers have been most rewarding experience and challenging one as well. Providers in the rural setting are hard to find. There are times providers quit, not show up on time. As a parent, arrangements had to be made to be home with our son, which interrupted his familiar routine. In 2019, DHHS allowed parents with powers of attorney rights their role as independent providers. This gave us option to be a backup for the scheduled providers. Then in December 2020, DHHS made a revision to their policy manual that power of attorneys cannot be independent providers. DHHS felt that it was a conflict of interest, even though there are controls in place by the services coordinators. After a recent investigation of my son's case, DHHS recommended that I revoke my status as an independent provider and keep the program active. My husband, on the other hand, was required to relinquish his power of attorney rights and retain his status as independent provider. This arrangement wasn't taken lightly. The situation left one less provider to assist in our son's program, also leaving our son vulnerable due to inadequate representation to assist him in his life decisions. Please consider the story in support of LB 1216. Thank you.
Thank you. And we appreciate your testimony and coming from Clay Center.
Thank you.
And have a great weekend.
You too.
Next proponent. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Senator Lathrop and members. To help provide physical, mental, and social health for my younger brother with a developmental disability to keep him safe and in his home. As his oldest sister by 15 years, I know my brother's needs intimately. I ask you, who better to care for him in the absence of our beloved parents than me, his sister and guardian? As our parents' ship began to go sideways, so did my brother's ship. Because our aging parents were not able to provide the proper support for him, his lease was not renewed, and he found himself facing a housing crisis. As a sibling who took over guardianship from my brother, I found myself in my own crisis as the unique and challenging situation of caring for the needs of our aging parents, my brother, and my own family of 4 children. I had to choose between my job and the needs of my brother and family. This left me no choice but to leave my job and the workforce for the unforeseeable future. I have also been unsuccessful in hiring responsible and appropriate independent providers. Due to the shortage of providers, there are few, if any, with the specific needs to support my brother, leaving me to become his support person. If you vote to allow guardians to be independent providers, it will also help the next generation and our family and families like ours. When I'm no longer able to care for my brother, my children, his nieces and nephews, will be the ones to care for him. They will most likely be in their 20s and 30s while completing their education, starting their careers, and raising their own families. I ask you to keep my brother safe and from harm due to the shortage of independent providers, and to expand the pool of providers by allowing family guardians to fill the workforce gap. This is a small change. A simple change to the law that will have an incredible impact on my life, my brother's life, my family's life, and all the families like ours across Nebraska. I know this because I've talked to these families, supported these families, and I am now living it. The average lifespan of a person with Down syndrome, which my brother is one of those persons, is 60 years, which means my kids will be the 3rd generation in our family to take care of my brother. This bill just makes sense. Our families provide services for our loved one from day one. If there are no or few caregivers, this solution seems obvious to me to let our families fill the gap. Family members need to be independent providers. Therefore, I respectfully ask you to please move LB 1216 out of committee to general file to help fill the independent provider workforce gap and get needed life-dependent support to the citizens with disabilities in our state. Thank you for this opportunity to speak and for your consideration.
Okay. Thanks for being here this afternoon.
Yeah, of course.
Appreciate
Thank
hearing
you.
from you.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
My name is Mary Jan Fiala. That's MaryJan, F as in Frank, IALA. My testimony represents my own experience and opinions and not any of the organizations that I'm affiliated with. I'm here today to testify in support of parental guardians being able to act as paid independent providers for their minor children. After my son's tracheostomy procedure, we were warned that finding reliable dependent care would be the most challenging aspect of the journey ahead. As such, we relocated to Omaha in hopes that we'd find better luck than rural Nebraska. But when I called to inquire with home health agencies, I was told that the wait could be 6 months or up to a year. At that point, my son had already been hospitalized for 18 months. So I went on the offensive, volunteering to cover the night shift. At that point, having no idea how I would work my full-time job, be a mother to my 4 children, and act as his night and often day nurse. Our team was very hesitant to discharge under that situation, but they finally agreed, influenced by the pandemic. The pandemic was the only reason that my son escaped multiple more months in a congregate care facility waiting for nursing, an experience that far too many families we know have. When we first came home, our only dependent help came from nurses that we recruited ourselves. Those included part-time help, as well as NICU nurses that took on shifts caring for my son in addition to their full-time responsibilities. And they were fantastic nurses, but they were also stretched very thin. My husband and I quickly realized that if we were going to survive this journey, that we would have to work opposite shifts. No employer would ever accommodate the amount of absences that we would need to be able to provide the care for our son. That left us shifts passing in the night, one of us working days, one of us working nights, to ensure that we could always pick up the slack when nursing care was not available. Now, I want to be clear when I talk about caring for our trached, ventilator-dependent, and G-tube dependent son. I'm talking about providing nursing level of care in a mini home-based ICU. I'm talking about dosing and pushing 14 medications. I'm talking about troubleshooting ventilator alarms and setting up feeding pumps to run nutrition into his little body. I'm talking about constantly being prepared to respond to a medical emergency with chest compressions or manual bagging. The level of care that parents like us provide our children far surpasses that of typical parenting responsibilities. Allowing parental guardians to serve as paid independent providers for their children would reduce the number of people like my son in congregate care settings waiting for support, and it would ensure that they're able to live at home where they belong. Thank you.
That gives us some context. Yeah, I appreciate your testimony.
Thank you.
Next proponent. Good afternoon.
Hi. My name is Teresa Eberhardt, Teresa Eberhart, and I'm here with my daughter, Emma. 10 years ago, we lived in Colorado, and when we were living in Colorado, I was encouraged and allowed to be her paid care provider, and obviously I was her parent. There are two basic reasons we're here in support of this bill. One is the shortage of direct service providers, and the other is Emma's safety. The extreme shortage of direct service providers has negatively impacted our family for many years. Last week, I received an email from the agency we work with who, trying to find direct service providers, they said they were giving up on finding someone for Emma during this time, and they were going to only focus on what she might need during the summer. So we're left with nothing at this point. My husband's job takes him out of town a lot, and I work full-time as well. If a caregiver isn't found for Emma, I don't know what we'll do in May. Who will care for Emma for 8 hours a day and keep her safe? Will I have to quit my job, which would be financially devastating to our family? Opponents to this bill feel guardians should not be independent care providers because the guardians need to continue to provide the oversight to ensure the safety of the care recipients. But consider how that's going right now. People with developmental disabilities continue to be victims of abuse and neglect at a much higher rate than those without disabilities. The current process of guardians only as overseers is not the answer to decreasing abuse experienced by our loved ones. The status quo is not infallible, and it is in need of change. The second reason is because of specific support needs Emma has. Very few people in general public have a vehicle that they can transport someone with a wheelchair. That means Emma becomes socially isolated if we even were to find a care provider that could watch her. Social isolation is a huge risk factor in terms of abuse. So even if she had a care provider that couldn't take her places because of transportation barriers, she would be at risk. Communication is another area that is difficult to find competent care providers. Emma's learning to use her computer, her AAC device, to communicate. There are specific ways to educate people to use the AAC communicators. If she doesn't learn authentic, independent communication, she's more vulnerable. I was shocked to learn that 80% of women with developmental disabilities have been sexually abused in their lifetime. Emma's support needs include helping with highly personal things such as dressing, toileting, and showering. Imagine if you were told your daughter, your mother, your granddaughter had an 80% chance of being sexually abused. How safe would you feel having an ever-revolving door of strangers coming into your home? Even if those care providers that come into our home are not the abuser, it teaches Emma that anybody she comes in contact with can pull her pants down and that she's supposed to comply, because that's the reality of her life when we have short-term caregivers. Emma will be turning 19 years old in August. This means we will be determining guardianship. It has been suggested by professionals in the field of service providers that I not become her guardian so that I can be her independent care provider under the current policy. But I'm the best person to be her guardian. Under the current policy, we are in a no-win situation. Do we compromise on Emma's safety as it relates to guardianship, or do we compromise on Emma's safety as it relates to caregivers? When you vote in favor of LB 1216, you create a safer life for Emma and other vulnerable individuals, some of which may be your own family members, if not today, someday.
Okay. Hey, thanks for being here. Appreciate hearing from you.
Obviously passionate.
That's okay.
Thank you.
Good reason. Next proponent.
Welcome. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Leah Bolt, Leahboldt. And thank you, Senator Lathrop and members of the Judiciary Committee for having us today. I am here today to share my story with you in the hope that you will vote in support of LB 1216. As you've heard from others, there is a critical direct support professional shortage in the workforce, causing a major strain to families throughout Nebraska. As many of us are also hearing, there is a compounding teacher shortage, and that is where my story comes in. I started my career as a high school science teacher shortly after graduating from college. Marriage and babies soon followed. A teacher's schedule is great for working moms, right? I thought so too until I welcomed my third child, a sweet baby boy we named Clay. Clay was born with Down syndrome. Clay spent the first few weeks of his life in the NICU, followed by almost daily doctor's appointments, an open heart surgery, another extended stay at the hospital, more appointments, more surgeries, therapies to play catch up for missed milestones, specialist referrals, and many late nights in the ER shadowed his first few years of life. The 7 to 4 schedule of a teacher was no longer realistic. My son required nursing level of care, and that nurse was me. Unfortunately, a nursing salary did not come along with my newly appointed position. In my continued journey as an advocate and mentor to those learning how to navigate this world of waivers and dead ends, I have witnessed so many parents who quit their jobs or cut their hours in order to take on the extra responsibilities that come along with being a parent to a child with special needs. I know I'm not alone in this feeling of hopelessness, and obviously the 14 people that were here to testify show that as well. By allowing guardians to work as independent providers, you will decrease the financial burden on families who are faced with the impossible decision of earning a paycheck or caring for their child. Thank you for taking time to listen to my story, and I encourage you to imagine yourself in our footsteps as you further your discussions regarding LB 1216.
Thank you, Ms. Bold. Any questions? Ms. Bold? Thank you for coming today. Appreciate it. Next proponent.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Senator Lathrop and members of the Judiciary Committee. My name is Denise Geringer, DENISE, I'm here today in support of LB 1216 with its most recent amendments. I'm the mother of a 26-year-old son with Down syndrome. I also advocate for all people with disabilities through my volunteer work with several Nebraska and national disability organizations. I'm the executive director of an organization that builds and operates affordable and community-centered apartments for adults with developmental disabilities, otherwise referred to as DD, and President of the Board of Directors of the Down Syndrome Alliance of the Midlands, which brings me here today. Because of my lived experience in the disability community, I have firsthand knowledge of the struggles that individuals with DD and their families face. Indisputably, the predominant issue they are facing is the lack of direct care professionals available to provide support for their family member who has nursing level of care needs. It's important to point out that what we are discussing today is to allow the guardian to be a paid independent provider for their family member who has been deemed in need of nursing level of care by DHHS. The person with DD has also been provided a budget to hire the needed supports. However, due to the shortage in skilled support workers, many are not able to hire a provider. The shortage situation was in crisis mode across Nebraska and the entire country before the pandemic. It has been further exacerbated because of the pandemic. We have heard of this workforce shortage from provider agencies as well as families. Just a few weeks ago, I sat in an appropriations hearing where a Lincoln area provider agency representative stated that they had at least a 40% turnover in support staff employees each year. We know it's significantly more difficult in rural and frontier areas of our state. I also want to share with you an answer to a question that was brought to me by a person who does not walk in the shoes of a parent guardian of a family member with DD, one that you may have as well. They asked, isn't there an expectation that the parents are responsible to parent without getting paid? And I want you to know that the support we are discussing is far more than typical parenting duties, and it is needed for the entire length of the disabled person's life. No parent guardian is trying to make a fast buck. Due to no fault of their own, they are left with choosing between the safety and life-dependent care of their family member with DD and their own family duties, when primarily contributing to the family income through employment. Being a paid independent provider could help them in contributing to the family finances by offering an opportunity to be employed in that area that they are skilled in that is in high need of workers. If a parent guardian could hire a support person that was available, skilled and dependable with all their allotted DHS funding, I believe they would. Then they could better carry out the typical parenting duties that they are responsible for, as well as take care of themselves and balance the attention needed by their other family members. Unfortunately, the support persons available to hire do not meet the vast need. Parents of individuals with DD are trusted to be Social Security representative payees, court-appointed guardians and conservators, and Medicaid managers with all the subsequent reporting and oversight. There's no reason parents and parent guardians could not also be trusted to be. Please consider all of the testimony today in passing. LB 1216 from committee to the general file, and I welcome any questions. Thank you.
I don't see any questions today, but thanks for being here. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. My name's Christine True, CHRISTINE, TRUE, and I had not planned on testifying, so I have nothing written for you. However, I am a family member of an individual with an intellectual and developmental disability, my brother Joe, and I am his shared living provider. I was his independent provider, and I'm also serving as an independent provider for some friends who have a child with a developmental disability. I'm also by profession occupational therapist, so I work with people with intellectual disabilities and developmental disabilities every day. Just a little bit about my own family as a testifying piece. Joseph wasn't able to have an independent provider for several years because of staffing issues, and mom and dad weren't able to use the money for him to provide that care, so they didn't get to do some of the things that they needed to do. My mom didn't work because somebody needed to stay home and support Joseph through that time when he wasn't going to necessarily be in day services. And so I went ahead, and when I was able and had time in my schedule, I was like, let me become an independent provider so you can have time on the weekends and evenings. It took well over 6 months with really responsive services coordination to help me get through that process. We had a couple other family friends who were trying, and it took even longer, and they ended up dropping out. So just, I really, given what my mom had gone through and just going through that whole independent provider process myself, I think that this bill would help fill the gap and the need for families, including my own.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, for somebody that showed up with no notes, you did fine. Yeah, thanks for being here. Any other proponent testimony?
Hi, my name is Lisa O'Connell, LISAOCONNELL. I am from Fremont and I am a mom, aunt, and legal guardian of 3 boys, 23, 25, and 26. They have been diagnosed with ADHD, Asperger's, autism, depression, anxiety, learning disabilities. The 23-year-old, 26-year-old are in the Madonna School in the employment program. My 25-year-old attends Hand of Heartland, and he's currently looking for another job because his other job got closed down, and he's having a hard time with his providers to try to have somebody be with him on these interviews. Just last week, I went to one with him at Menards, and they chose to hire somebody else. But basically, I have been also dealing with this situation. My brother is 48, so I've been dealing with since he was little and still to today. I am doing everybody's paperwork, like they said, the Social Security, the guardianship reporting, that is a long tasking thing. And I actually volunteer and work at an agency, Uniquely U.S. Stability Support. I'm a master gardener on top of everything else. And I do this so the kids can see you can still do stuff, but as a paid person in their lives would be a lot easier on me being able to be home more and so they can see more. And on top of all this, dealing with the health condition, it's a multiple hereditary osteochondroma that can lead from doing everything normal to all of a sudden being in a wheelchair with multiple surgeries and stuff. And everybody in my family and my 3 boys all have this condition. And it's just a lot of task and work with all the doctor's appointments and meetings, and seems like every other week, there's this appointment, that appointment, paperwork's due. DHHS, and a lot of people, like in certain areas, technically the moms and the parents would actually do better in these positions than some of the workers, because you get hardly nowhere when you talk to some people, especially with DHHS. Well, to tell them that that's not my money, it's theirs. Do you not understand that concept? And it's like every year, after all these years, I'm still dealing with the same component of that. So it's just, more teaching actually needs to be brought out too. But I think that this would be the best avenue for everybody.
Okay. So you're telling us when you call DHHS, they're not always helpful?
That's correct.
We're shocked.
Well, I know that, but I'm always, the best thing is I just go right to ask for a manager, supervisor. And everybody I deal with at the agency, I tell them the same thing.
Okay.
So,
Well, we're sorry it's so difficult for you, but thanks for being here to share that.
thanks.
Next proponent. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Senators. My name is Jennifer Hansen, and I am an employee of the Monroe Meyer Institute at UNMC, but my testimony is my own based on my experiences as a family member and not representative of MMI or UNMC. I am in support of LB.
Jennifer, you're going to have to spell your name.
Oh, sorry, JENNIFERHANSEN.
Okay.
I am in support of LB 1216 based on my firsthand experience of having a child with disabilities. As a parent of an individual with disabilities, every committee you are on, training you go through, every meeting you attend emphasizes how imperative your role as a parent is and how critical it is that you are at the table when decisions are being made. How sharing the lived experience perspective is imperative. Well, here we are. Our testimony is based on our knowledge. We are the experts, and I implore you to hear us and to listen to us when we tell you what we need. I'm the parent of 3. My middle daughter has a rare genetic syndrome that resulted in intellectual and developmental disabilities and significant limitations in her functional skills. We also have the joy of dealing with very significant behavioral issues. She is 11 years old. She has limited verbal communication and needs moderate to total assistance for all activities of daily living, eating, bathing, dressing, etc. She is on the age and disabled waiver as she meets the nursing facility level of care. While we are extremely grateful to be on this waiver, the lack of care providers to deliver the services provided under the waiver is at a critical level. Even prior to the pandemic, I had called several agencies to see if we could get services for my daughter, including respite and childcare. I left several messages and didn't even get a call back from any of them. I was able to get a hold of one agency and fill out the paperwork and never heard anything back. I talked to an intake coordinator at Children's Hospital Home Health Care to see about getting assistance. They said their wait list was at least 2 years to get in-home care. That was 3 years ago. It has only gotten worse since the pandemic. There are no daycare or childcare options for us. There is no going to a friend's house to give us a break for a while. There are no family members who can take care of her for a couple of hours. We have tried, but no one is able to provide for the needs of my daughter. We haven't had a break in over 2 years. Since she was a baby, I've had to limit myself to jobs that allow me to work from home as needed, as well as great flexibility in hours since she has been in day treatment, meaning 8:30 to 4 Monday through Friday for 3 to 4 months at a time, and multiple additional appointments a week since she was born. My priority and my most important job is to be my daughter's caretaker. We are very lucky to be a 2-income family, as well as to have the waiver to help with medical expenses. However, we still have substantial financial ramifications due to my restricted work options. I am unable to advance in my career and increase my earning ability. I have had to change jobs, continually decrease my work hours, and decline promotions. When school closed due to COVID, we had difficult decisions to make as a family, as did many others. We had to further decrease my work hours to what was feasible to work from home while caring for all 3 of my children. However, our middle daughter was not able to do virtual learning, and that meant that it was all on me.
I think we get it. Let me ask a question.
Yes.
Is this an issue about what we're paying the providers?
Yeah.
We're not paying them enough, so we don't have enough of them?
Well, later on in my testimony,
Not to pay you. I'm not asking that question. I'm asking, it sounds like you're saying we can't find the people even when we get the okay and we get authority or whatever you get from HHS that says you're gonna take this and go find a service provider, and you're not able to find them.
I do think that is part of it. Obviously, since this was even prior to the pandemic, we were having issues with shortages. I think this has been ongoing that we haven't addressed this issue. I think we're just at a crisis point right now. And I don't know, especially in the rural areas, that there has ever been or ever potentially could be enough providers unless we really invest in the system.
Didn't we do, and I'm thinking Senator Bowles may have worked on this issue, a provider reimbursement study of some kind, and then we beefed up the provider rates?
I do believe that there have been quite a few studies done related to developmental disabilities and Medicaid, and I don't know if much has come out of them. And I do know that there was a bump in pay, but I don't know, it's the work that is being asked of these providers, it is not in line with what they are being paid.
Okay. Yeah, I hear some parents that are coming here today say, I want to be the one that does it because I want to be there and make sure that it's being done well and my child is being taken care of in a safe manner. And then there's people I hear that say, I would like to get a provider and have help, but I can't find one, so I need to be doing it myself and compensated.
I definitely think it's a mixture of both, especially in my position where my daughter does need such extensive needs, but she also has severe behaviors, which means she will injure herself and others. And so to ask somebody to come in to do that work for $12 an hour, I would feel bad doing that.
Yeah,
So,
well, it's a challenge, isn't it?
yes, yes.
Okay. Well, we appreciate you
Yes.
being here.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Well, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Good
Steve,
to
it's
see
been
you.
a while
Yeah, it has.
in committee. If I could, I'll answer a little bit of your question you just asked Jennifer. So the average
Let's
rate.
start with your name and then
Okay,
we got to have
sorry.
you spell it.
Joe Valenti, Joe, V as in Victor, Alenti. So the average rate of pay for the direct support staff in Nebraska is about $13.27. So I don't need to explain the rest to you probably. But what happens with rate increases, committee, and this is not necessarily your area, it goes to Health and Human Services, and John Arch has plenty to do there too. But is that you give a rate increase, the challenge is, as the state, is how much of that rate increase goes to the DSPs versus to administration or to the CEOs of the provider network. Not trying to be derogatory, but that's the fact.
Okay.
So I'm here in support of LB 1216. Parents like these and many others need help for their children. Many years ago, when my wife and I needed help for our son Donnie, who is now 34 and resides at BSDC, our only choice after exhausting many options was to make him a ward of the state to get the services that he needed. I really hope these parents would never have to do that. Again, he's at BSDC, and the reason he's there is because after many, many placements in the community, which were unsuccessful. Senators, I have testified on several occasions this year before several committees. In every case, it seems to me that the Department of Health and Human Services is the theme. Here we are again, trying to do patchwork system, which is not caring for some of our most vulnerable who cannot speak or care for themselves. This bill and its intent should never have been presented to you, the Judiciary Committee. Nebraska's leadership from this governor, other governors, and years of leaders with HHS have ignored consistently the need for services and programs. The theme seems to be the same, be it the juvenile centers, the regional hospitals in Lincoln and Norfolk, the Beatrice State Developmental Center, the foster care system, the lack of proper waivers and programs for our DD, IDD population, and those with severe mental challenges. The waiting list for services, which has money to move people off the waiting list, can't even be accomplished today consistently because the providers cannot provide the service. Now, this is not a new problem. The providers knew of this. This was a problem that came up 5, 6, 7 years ago in studies, but nothing has been done to resolve this problem. So again, it's going to take creative thinking. This is not your committee's work, but 1216 is needed for these parents. But again, it's just patchwork. We just keep patching and kicking the can down the road. And I know you have enough issues with the penal system as it is, but it's a very similar analogy. So again, I hate to get too broad with you, but again, it's been a failure to lead by the executives of this state as well as HHS on a consistent basis. Because when you're appointed by the governor, that's what happens. You're afraid to ask.
Okay.
So sorry to be so direct, but that's a fact. And I don't get paid to be nice.
We're used to direct. We've worked since the BSDC Special Investigative Committee. Thank you for your advocacy. And you know what, you said it's been a few years since we started talking about this. I know that there were alarm bells sounded when we did that Special Investigative Committee, probably in 2009, somewhere in there, 8 or 9, whatever.
When I was much younger.
So was I. And the fact that we were not compensating the providers sufficiently, and we knew providers were leaving the state because we weren't being a good partner with them. And now it's not surprising that we have a shortage of providers.
Negotiate some pretty substantial increases for their staff, which has helped to in some cases, hiring and retain staff. But money is not going to solve this problem for these folks as well as the provider network. It's going to take a lot of work. I mean, it's going to take some, going to high schools, going to community colleges. But I'm sorry, Senators, that's just not happening. I know that's not your area. That's not why you're here today. But I mean, it's really sad that you have to even address a bill like this, because I know there's a lot of complications with guardianships and so forth and so on within the statute, which I'm not paid at all to figure out.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Senator Brand.
Thank you, Chairman Lathrop. Thank you, Joe, for all the work that you do. And this question's a little outside of the bill, but because your son's at Beatrice, do you feel Beatrice is being fully utilized today?
No.
I mean, what capacity do you think they have to use to help other?
I would say, if I was, okay, that's a great question, and I'm going to be, I am very, very close to the situation down there. I would say their capacity is not much greater than what they have today. They have approximately 85 individuals in what I would call the medical side of Beatrice, a BSDC. And then in the crisis, they have a crisis unit and a step-down unit, which our son, he goes from crisis to step down back to crisis. But anyway, it's a different story. They probably have 5 or 6 in that program. I could say they could handle a few more in each of those programs. Real quickly, back to studies. We keep doing studies, but implementing what the study says and getting back to stakeholders, that circle just doesn't ever get completed. So I think to answer your specific question, I think you could do a lot better at Beatrice, but there's such a movement from CMS and other opponents of that, of institutional care, that it's a really hard thing for HHS also. So I'm giving you kind of both sides, but I would tell you, the care at Beatrice for a lot of individuals would really help the community if they would allow more individuals to go to Beatrice. Because at the high end, when the community has to take care of individuals, I would take our son as an example, it's 3 and 4 on 1 type of staffing. Well, and a lot of people talk about the cost of Beatrice. Well, I can tell you the cost is give or take around $300,000 per individual at Beatrice. When that same individual is in the community, it's the same cost. When that same type of individual, high risk, tier 1, it's 3 and 4 on 1 in the community home.
All right. Thanks, Joe.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here. Good to see you. Any other proponent testimony? Seeing none, we'll take opposition testimony. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Senator Lathrop, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Brad, B-R-A-D, Meurrens, M-E-U-R-R-E-N-S, and I am the Public Policy Director at Disability Rights Nebraska. We are the designated protection and advocacy organization for persons with disabilities in Nebraska, and I'm here in opposition to LB 1216 and the amendments as they are written. To be clear, we are not insensitive or dismissive of the needs of families. The dearth of service providers has a real and significant impact on the lives of individuals with disabilities and their families. As the protection and advocacy organization, we are charged with protecting and advocating for the legal and civil rights of persons with disabilities in Nebraska. And as an agency that gets calls regarding inappropriate or exploitative guardianships like Judith Widener, we are additionally concerned about the rights of individuals subject to that guardianship. For the National Council on Disability reminds us that the legal implications of guardianships impact a person's civil rights. They can be a drastic restraint on a person's liberty and should be recognized as an extraordinary intervention in a person's life. That warning should give us great pause. Rather than enact quick legislation, we should instead engage in a deliberative, thorough, and expansive review of our guardianship statutes and consider updates where needed. The bill and the amendments prescriptions do not apply just to those with intellectual developmental disabilities, but all disability types, the aging community, and any other person that is deemed incapacitated, hence the need for inclusive deliberation. The bill also invites serious conflicts of interest between the ward, guardian, family, and institution, all without sufficient protection. Some states have made changes to their guardianship statutes, but we have not gathered sufficient data and understanding of the outcomes. Some states have built in additional layers of rights protections to allow expanded categories and avoid or mitigate potential conflict of interests. The Uniform Law Commission's guardianship proposal includes reform ideas that do show promise. A fruitful change, rather, might also lie in the Medicaid waivers, not the guardianship statutes. LB 1216 and the amendments are not the approach we should take. It proposes changes to our decades-old guardianship statutes that have not
Any other opposition testimony? Anyone here to testify in a neutral capacity on LB 1216? Good afternoon.
Hi, good afternoon, Senators. My name is Kristen Larson, Kristen Larsen, and I'm here on behalf of the Nebraska Council on Developmental Disabilities to testify in the neutral capacity on LB 1216. Although the council is appointed by the governor and administrated by DHHS, the council operates independently. Our comments do not necessarily reflect the views of the governor or his administration or the department. We are a federally mandated independent council comprised of individuals and families of persons with DD, community providers, and agency reps who advocate for systems change and quality services. The council serves as a source of information and advice for state policymakers and senators, taking a nonpartisan approach to provide education and information on bills that will impact individuals with DD. Council members took additional time and consideration to review and discuss LB 1216 at their quarterly council meeting. At that time, they voted to take a position on LB 1216 with the initial bill language that was introduced. AM 1949 had not been dropped, so in accordance with council practice, members had to make a decision on LB 1216 as written. Edison McDonald, the ARC Nebraska Director, provided additional information about the intent of the bill to make changes to state statute that would allow the guardians and parents to be paid caregivers for waiver services. He noted that the intention was not to expand guardianship and explained that many families had expressed the need to be allowed to be paid waiver providers, especially since the current paid caregiver workforce shortage poses a burden to many families. Providing a pathway for families and guardians to be a paid caregiver will alleviate the emotional and financial stress that many are facing, as you heard today. Still, the council had concerns related to all of the proposed cuts to language on page 2, lines 4 through 18. By striking this language, it would provide to expect it could be possibly expand guardianship, which would lead to unintentional consequences of creating a power imbalance for individuals with disabilities and or elderly citizens and with their facility or agency providers. Supporting LB 1216 as written would also run contrary to the council's endorsement of the supported decision-making SDM practice as an alternative to guardianship. And there's more about that in my written testimony. Edison shared that the potential amendment revision would leave in all of the language we had concerns with, and the amendment language would allow guardians to serve as independent providers. So the council must comply with the Nebraska Open Meetings Act, and time was set aside in our agenda for public comment. Comments in support of 1216 were given by 9 mothers of parents who had children with disabilities about the struggles they faced to find paid caregivers to provide waiver supports for their children. 2 other parents submitted written testimony. Their stories all noted the shortage of paid caregivers, unique family situations, and how they frequently serve as a last resort to provide unpaid, round-the-clock care for their children. They talked of the need to have paid caregivers in order to stay employed, the disruptive impact that high rates of the high turnover rate has on their children, or when folks just don't show, and the need for caregivers for individuals with complex medical needs who require 24/7 care. They all mentioned the need for backup support to make it possible to juggle the regular demands of family life, and these parents need to be heard and supported. I want to note that I know my red light's on, but I've got a little bit more. Tony Green also serves on our DD Council as an agency rep. And so at our last quarterly meeting, we asked him just point blank, how can this be addressed? He shared that CMS does allow guardians to be paid providers, and some states allow the practice. But in order to do that, there needs to, the bottom line is there needs to be options available to guardians, and that you can do it without changing the statute, but they require multiple steps, including the ones I've noted in my testimony. So, but it can be done. So I want to be clear, it can be done. We recognize that there are members in our disability community that still have some concerns with protection and advocacy of individuals. And so there are some issues that still would need to be addressed with that if we were able to get CMS approval to provide this, especially addressing the conflict of interest between the parent as the guardian and an entity employing them to provide services to their ward, or to make sure that there's additional monitoring on that. But we just recommend a legislative resolution, and we think that with the passage of LB 376 and the DD consultant that's tied to that would be an excellent opportunity.
As you would expect, have position letters, 33 as proponent, 3 as opponent, and 2 in the neutral capacity.
Thank you, Chairman Lathrop and members of the committee, and thank you to everyone who came and testified today. I very much appreciate them kind of laying out what the situation is currently, and I think it's clear from everyone's testimony, from proponent, opponent, and neutral, that there's work that needs to be done in this area, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And so I am committed to partnering with everyone who spoke today in finding a solution to this and moving it forward. To your question of one of our testifiers, you kind of hit it right on the head. Pay. What do we pay these people to provide these services? I mean, when I first started on this journey, I thought everybody talked about how the pay was low, and I was like, oh, I actually don't know what the pay is. I was thinking like, it's probably like $20, $25 an hour. It's like 12. I mean, I could work at Target for, more than that and be a lot less stressed out. So the people who are doing the work of providing these services are massively underpaid. And as a result, if they are a household of more than 3 people, they qualify for different welfare programs or public programs, such as SNAP and childcare subsidies. So they can't even afford to send their child to childcare so that they can work to take care of disabled individuals. Clearly, that's a broken system. Sorry, that was a little brainstorming. I'll take any questions.
It feels a little bit like an HHS hearing.
I know.
I get that we're talking about guardianships and the like, but the compensation of individuals providing the care in the family or outside the family, a little bit out of our wheelhouse.
That is actually an appropriations issue, and it is one that the chairman of appropriations is prioritizing this year to address, and also the chairman of HHS is working with him on that. So hopefully this year we will see some changes to provider rates.
Okay, very good. Well, I appreciate you bringing the bill, and I'm sure the families do too, because we've had a good airing of the problem today,
Yes.
and I look forward to hearing that there's a solution.
And this crew is well known in HHS. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. That will close our hearing on LB 1216 and bring us to the last bill of the day and our own Senator Day. Joe, good to see you. Yeah, take care.
Jen, have you been here before?
I think I had one last year, but I think I had my staff introduce myself.
I was thinking this was your first time.
We'll have you open in just a minute. Okay, Senator Day, welcome.
Thank
you. Good afternoon, Chairman Lathrop and members of the Judiciary Committee. My name is Jen Day, that's Jenday, and I proudly represent Legislative District 49 in Sarpy County. I'm introducing LB 772 to support victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, and child abuse by ensuring that they do not experience financial debt as a result of seeking necessary medical care. LB 772 would prohibit providers of medical care and services related to the examination or treatment of domestic assault, sexual assault, or child abuse from referring victims to collections or distributing information that would affect the credit rating of the victim or the victim's family. This bill does not prevent healthcare providers from seeking reimbursement for services from the survivor, insurance, or other available forms of payment. Accessing medical care is often an essential resource for many survivors, whether that be receiving a forensic examination or treatment for an injury arising from domestic or sexual violence. However, payment of medical bills and accruing medical debt can serve as a major financial consequence to survivors and prevent them from seeking the care that they need. LB 772 will eliminate a critical financial barrier to seeking appropriate care by protecting survivors from medical debt. This legislation is especially important for the types of victims it covers of domestic abuse, child abuse, trafficking, and sexual assault because of the unique trauma and stigma they face from these crimes. It creates challenges for seeking help and plays a role in why these cases are so frequently underreported. Healthcare providers serve as critical resources in identifying survivors and connecting providers can ensure that survivors are identified, their situations are reported as needed, and most importantly, that they are provided with appropriate support. LB 772 is a continuation of this legislature's work to ensure that the costs of care do not serve as a barrier to victims seeking the help that they need following domestic abuse or sexual assault. Last year, this committee advanced and the legislature passed 2 bills to make the Crime Victims Reparations Program more accessible to survivors by lifting some administrative barriers and allowing healthcare providers to bill the CVR program directly. LB 772 is an important next step. Now that we have provided an avenue to reimbursement for healthcare providers through CVR, LB 772 will ensure that survivors are not sent to collections for the cost of healthcare resulting from their victimization. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Okay. I don't see any questions. They are hard to come by on Friday afternoon.
I bet they are. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Day. We will take proponent testimony at this time. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Chairperson Lathrop and members of the Judiciary Committee. My name is Rachel West, RACHEL I'm here to speak in support of LB 772 on behalf of the Nebraska Coalition to End Sexual and Domestic Violence and its network of local direct service provider programs across the state. These programs offer a range of services and supports to sexual and domestic violence survivors, including medical advocacy and referrals. Access to medical care is an essential resource for many survivors, yet some survivors fear that accessing care may lead to significant debt or other negative financial consequences. I would like to share with you one recent example of this from a rural area in the state. An advocate from a local service provider program worked with a survivor who was physically assaulted and strangled. The advocate visited with the survivor about seeking medical care for injuries. The survivor wanted to seek medical care, but was hesitant to do so out of concern that they would not be able to pay for it. The advocate explained that under existing state law and processes in place, the Nebraska Crime Victims Reparation Act covers costs incurred by healthcare providers in treating or examining survivors' injuries. The survivor was relieved to hear this, and the advocate accompanied the survivor to the emergency room. Later, the survivor signed a medical release of information for use in criminal charges, filed for a protection order, and cooperated with the police and the county attorney in the prosecution of charges. The following month, the survivor received a bill for medical expenses. The survivor brought a copy of the bill to share with the advocate and signed a release of information to grant permission for the advocate to contact individuals on their behalf to help with this. The advocate contacted the medical provider and both the Attorney General's office and the Nebraska Crime Commission about the established processes already in place for payment of forensic exams. In the meantime, the victim received more bills, which landed in collections. After the advocate made additional calls and explored financial hardship exemptions, the survivor ended up not having to pay the bill and the facility removed it from collections. It's clear that despite the current processes in place, survivors' medical bills are being sent to collections while medical providers wait for reimbursement or claims to crime victims' reparations are pending. Even though the situation ended with the survivor not paying the medical bill, it required a significant amount of hours from both the advocate and the survivor to resolve it. This burden fell on a survivor who is also trying to find and relocate to safe housing, file a protection order, maintain employment, and work with police officers and prosecution, all while working through the trauma of the violence that they experienced. Additionally, when survivors' medical bills are sent to collections, the impact on survivors' credit scores jeopardize their efforts for safety at the very time they need it most. This process is even more traumatizing for survivors who do not have the direct support of an advocate and are navigating this process on their own. I urge you to vote LB 772 out of committee. Thank you for allowing me to share this example with you today.
Okay. I don't see any questions.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for being here. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. My name is Katie Welsh, K-A-T-I-E-W-E-L-S-H. I'm an attorney and the legal director at the Women's Center for Advancement. We're a nonprofit organization that serves survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault in Omaha, Nebraska. I'm here today to express the WCA's support for LB 772 because no survivor should choose between debt and necessary medical care in the aftermath of an assault. As a victim services organization, we are accustomed to seeing victims navigate the healthcare system. Most of our clients will have received medical treatment for a serious assault or will eventually heed our advice to address their untreated symptoms resulting from that assault. For example, our advocates often respond to the hospital to have initial meetings with victims who have been raped and are in the process of undergoing a sexual assault exam. Following these encounters, our advocates immediately get to work on helping these victims obtain protection orders, find beds at a shelter, secure food and clothing, and participate in crisis counseling. The hospital bills resulting from their visit are just not a priority by comparison to a victim's immediate safety. Still, other victims we meet are not receiving the medical attention they need until after they have sought our services. Some of them have left dangerous situations where they were denied access to the phone, insurance card, and a vehicle to the hospital. Despite undergoing serious repeated physical abuse, they can't gain access to necessary medical care until later. They may be living with chronic pain from the repeated abuse, including symptoms from traumatic brain injury. Knowing the abuse our clients have endured, as well as all the help they need to restart their life, including building or rebuilding their financial stability, I'm certain that hospital bills are not only an unwelcome reminder of their trauma, but also an additional burden that stands in the way of fully restarting their life after the violence they've experienced. Victims often are unable to pay because they have had to start over financially. Their abusers may have drained their bank account, ruined their credit, or refused them access to insurance cards. In other cases, victims don't want to use their insurance cards because they worry about privacy or safety issues if family members or others find out, so they pay out of pocket. Essentially, the monetary costs of medical services are routinely billed directly to the victim, either because they have not used their insurance, they use their insurance, but the services aren't totally covered, or they are uninsured. Victims are in these situations through no fault of their own. When the bill goes unpaid, it gets sent to a collection agency, in some cases years after the original incident, which leads to more phone calls and letters ordering the victim to pay up. The original crisis that brings the victim through our doors will have long since been addressed so that we are no longer in their lives and therefore can't provide them the resources they need to address their collections case. If we are still involved with the victim, they may not know that they need help. Even when they know they need it, my legal team doesn't have the capacity to provide anything more than counsel and advice for collections cases. Victims are often navigating the systems to pay the debt on their own. Without the protections offered by LB 772, victims will continue to shoulder the monetary costs of domestic and sexual assault, even though they did nothing wrong. No victim should hesitate to choose necessary medical treatment for fear of the debt that may result. LB 772 effectively ensures that victims will not be punished for the behavior of their abusers and subjected to further trauma. Therefore, we at the WCA on behalf of survivors ask you your support for LB 772 and advance it out of committee.
Okay. Thank you for being here. I gotta ask a question. Is the Crime Victims Reparation Fund that we talked about last year, is it sufficient to cover all these bills that we're talking about?
My understanding is that it is not.
I didn't think it was. Okay. Thank you. Next proponent. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Dear Senator Lathrop and members of the Judiciary Committee, my name is Andrea Edwards, ANDREAEDWARDS. I am the Director of Heartland Housing Sanctuary at Heartland Family Service. I'm testifying today in favor of LB 772 on behalf of our agency and the clients we serve, and would like to extend our appreciation to Senator Day for bringing this bill forward. The Sanctuary program consists of a 14-bed shelter, community-based advocacy, and transitional and rapid rehousing for labor and sex trafficking victims. This program is based around prevention and recovery from human trafficking. As you can imagine, many of our clients have endured injuries from domestic and sexual assault. In these situations, survivors hesitate to go to the hospital or other facility to begin with because of fear related to discrimination, fear of their abuser or trafficker, fear that they may not get adequate medical attention due to past trauma during care, or they don't feel like they're worthy of medical care. If they are able to forego all these fears and make the decision to receive medical attention, the last thing they should ever have to think about is how they can afford to have their injuries treated. In all honesty, though, most of our sanctuary clients are not thinking about bills or debt. They are in such a heightened state of survival, acting from a fight or flight response to their trauma, that bills from medical services is the last thing from their minds. However, in some of our other programs, when our clients get to a place of some stability where they can begin to problem solve and plan for their future, this is when we see debt, bills, and bad credit come back to haunt them. If I were to ask any of those clients whether they whether they would go and get treated and get stuck with a bill that they cannot afford or go without treatment, each one of them would choose to go without treatment. In conclusion, it seems obvious to people in my field of work that survivors of crimes, especially some of the most heinous crimes, should never endure more pain and suffering than they already have. I hope this is obvious to you as well, that you vote LB 772 out of committee and pass it on the floor. Thank you for the opportunity to share, and I would be happy to answer any questions.
I don't see any questions today. Thank you for being here, though, Ms. Edwards.
My name is Natalia Tu, Nataliatu, and I am the Freedom from Violence Whites Fellow at the Women's Fund of Omaha. The Women's Fund testifies in support of LB 772 in its efforts to protect survivors of domestic and sexual violence from debt collectors after receiving necessary medical care. The National Crime Victimization Survey found that 58% of female sexual assault victims experience injury, and approximately 44% of victims raped by an intimate partner who receive medical care spend one or more nights in the hospital, indicating how critical medical services can be to survivors. However, the financial burden that is attached to obtaining medical care can be incredibly damaging to survivors, as several testifiers before me have outlined. On average, survivors of intimate partner violence pay almost 30% of medical costs out of pocket, and women survivors of intimate partner abuse experience 42% higher healthcare costs than their non-abused peers. The risk of being sent to collections or receiving a damaged credit score can have profoundly negative impacts for a survivor who is seeking to heal from the abuse they've experienced or who is potentially planning to leave their abuser, considering economic factors are amongst the top reasons why someone may choose to stay in an abusive relationship. This financial burden may also influence a survivor's decision to forego the care that they need altogether. To be clear, LB 772 aims to protect survivors from debt collectors, but does not prevent healthcare providers from seeking payment for the services from the victim, insurance companies, or any other source. While LB 772 will help ensure that survivors receive the care that they need without having to worry about being sent to a debt collection agency, the bill also helps establish a foundation in which situations of violence and abuse are reported appropriately. Nebraska is safer when survivors feel supported in coming forward to report the crimes that they've experienced. Currently, instances of domestic and sexual violence are frequently underreported, but when survivors seek necessary medical services, healthcare providers have the opportunity to make sure that survivors are identified, have access to appropriate resources, and that their cases are reported as needed. We urge you to vote in support of LB 772 to ensure that survivors of domestic and sexual violence will not experience additional financial hardship after obtaining essential medical care in the aftermath of their assault. Thank you, and I'd also like to note that forensic nurse examiner team leader at Methodist Hospital, Jen Tran, was planning to testify but had to run to another commitment, so I passed along her testimony as well.
Okay.
Thank you.
Very well. I don't see any questions, but thanks for being here. Appreciate hearing from the Women's Fund. Any other proponents? Anyone here in opposition? Or in the neutral capacity? Seeing none, Senator Day, you may close. We do have on LB 772, 18 letters that are from proponents, one from an opponent, and none in the neutral.
I will just add briefly that it's my personal philosophy that I don't think anyone should be going to collections for seeking medical care, but certainly not seeking medical care resulting from domestic violence or sexual assault or child abuse. So I don't have anything to add. I think the testifiers articulated it eloquently. I'm happy to answer any questions at 4:15 on Friday if you happen to have any.
Don't see any.
Okay.
Senator Day, thanks for bringing LB
Thank
772
you.
to the committee, and that will close our hearing on LB 772 and our hearings for the day.
Hey,
Hey, Jen.
Jen.
Go to him first.
Sorry.
Go to him first.
Yeah.